far, and we'll just keep moving forward. So today I wanted to let you know that our featured topics will be Juliet Marshall presenting on final fungicide recommendations for small grains. She is our agronomist and plant pathologist for the small grains for the University of Idaho. And then Joseph Sagers, who's an extension educator in what county?
Jefferson and Clark counties.
In Jefferson and Clark counties, Joseph will talk to us about using Teff grass as an emergency crop. So with that, I think I've covered all my announcements, and I think I'd like to open it up to some crop updates. And I think I want to invite Juliet to give us a crop update on small grains.
All right, thank you, Kasha. It's been, as it is every year, kind of an interesting year. I far expected that stripe rust would be a lot more prevalent. We shall see what happens with this series of weather that we're having. It is definitely cooler and rainy, perfect weather for stripe rust. The good news is that stripe rust, while Jen, I believe you saw it in the Twin Falls area, it's been rather low in the amount of pressure that we've seen. Jen, you want to comment on what you saw when you were down in the Twin Falls area?
Yeah, Twin Falls last week. Oh crap, I forget what day, but yeah, it was pretty minimal. I'd say it was probably what we were seeing in Washington maybe 2.5 to 3 weeks ago. But it's flaming in southern parts of Washington. Anything that hadn't been sprayed. So we're hammering away with the stripe rust in Washington so far. Thank you.
Okay, we're lucky here that it hasn't been flaming. We looked at a variety that we know is super susceptible down in the Twin Falls area, a variety named Brawl, Clearfield variety, and it did not have stripe rust at that particular location. It doesn't mean that it's not there, especially after this weather. The good news is for a lot of our winter wheat, we are past the window of application for fungicides for stripe rust. And for most everything else. So we're into milk to grain fill and some of the growth stages of our winter wheat in the Magic Valley area. As we get up towards the southeast Idaho, we are not out of the woods yet. There's still, in the dryland areas, there's some late varieties in the heading stage. I would say Soda Springs and the upper elevations around Ryrie, our dryland locations are still in the heading to flowering stage. And those would be susceptible to stripe rust at this point. But because the stripe rust pressure isn't very high, I don't foresee any particular recommendations or need for recommendations to apply fungicides. Anybody else in the southeast Idaho have any comments on that general statement?
I agree with it. We haven't seen much of it, even in Bannock and Bingham counties.
How about Trenton? Do you have any other comments to add for stripe rust in winter wheat?
No, I think you're right at this time. Most of it has started to head out. So yeah, we're probably way beyond what we need to be for growth stage for applying any fungicides, but just keep an eye out for it on any spring weeds.
Yeah, that's what we're looking at this point, is to see whether or not the stripe rust starts to develop in the spring wheats, the upper elevation spring wheats that are just at, well, I know in the Idaho Falls area we're at about flowering, about heading to flowering, depending upon how early the crop was planted and what geographic location. Ashton area should not be out of the woods at all. They're not heading quite yet. So those are still kind of vulnerable to stripe rust. So we'll be keeping an eye on that, and should, given this weather, we start to see some stripe rust activity, we would recommend some spraying on the susceptible varieties. But we'll hold off on that recommendation just yet until we know that the disease pressure is substantial enough to warrant the application. And the other thing that we've been seeing is definitely a lot of root rots, some cereal cyst nematode for sure, especially in sandy soils and in areas where there's been a lot of back-to-back cropping of cereals. And I don't know if I'm seeing more back-to-back cereals, but it does seem like I'm seeing a lot of fields now with 4 years plus of back-to-back cereals. And we're seeing a unique amount of take-all in spring grain. Very surprising to me, especially barley, spring barley. But we are seeing some foot rot in barley, bipolaris and fusarium type, as well as the take-all. And wheat for this particular season has been kind of quiet in the amount of diseases that we've seen, other than the normal stuff that you see when you have back-to-back cereals. Some cereal cyst nematode. But overall, the crop foliar diseases are low. Any of the diseases that we're seeing in the field are associated with root rots, whether it's Pythium, Rhizoctonia, but definitely some heavy amounts of disease pressure on the foot rots. Any other comments from anybody in the cereals region? Before I will talk a little bit later about fungicide applications late season, what's recommended and what's not.
Thanks, Juliet. Any other cereal reports or insight or issues that other people are facing or seeing around other parts of the state or the region?
Steve Hines is online. Can you make any comments about what you're seeing down there?
You know, I have not seen much in the way of disease of any kind. In the few fields that I've been out and around, things just look, I think, pretty good here in the Magic Valley.
Justin, do you have any comments down in your area? What about these late season rains? It's pretty phenomenal for our dryland producers.
Yeah, driving to work this morning, I think there's probably a lot of guys smiling down here. So I think things are looking pretty good.
So over here in northern eastern Idaho, I haven't seen any real fungus problems either. But a week ago, we had a really bad hailstorm come through. I have seen hail damage in some corn. I haven't seen it on any cereal crops yet, but it was kind of interesting to see that go through.
I think the rain might do some damage to some alfalfa that was down. I think we've got, at least in Bannock County, there was quite a few fields that had just cut, and I don't think they got it all up and out before the rain hit.
Okay, well, Kasha, I think that wraps up the small grains report for right now.
Okay, great. I'd like to move on to, well, Reed, you mentioned the alfalfa. Do you have any other insight on forages or any other crop?
Oh yeah, sorry, I probably jumped ahead. My bad. But yeah, I have been studying the thrips again out in just Blackfoot this year. And I don't know if Joseph is doing that over there. I don't know if you're doing that over there in Mud Lake, Joseph, or not, but we did have the thrips numbers bumped up right before this first harvest, not to a high amount, just to one of the lower amounts, maybe, you know, on that on those 6 stems that I take, so I zigzag across the field, we did get up in the tens and the teens numbers of thrips. And there was a slight, I think, yield reduction with that. I haven't actually done the data. I've just weighed the wet and dry samples. And to me, it seems like statistically there's going to be a difference there. So as we go throughout the season here, if those thrips populations build and we get a significant yield reduction, we may be able to kind of calculate at least a preliminary economic threshold or something like that. But yeah, the thrips did begin to build even on the first harvest, and there was possibly some yield reduction with it.
So what do you think is driving the thrips increase?
That is a good question, because we're still only really seeing it, at least in Bingham County on the West Desert, and in fields that are actually pretty close to CRP, or fields that are, you know, kind of range type fields. and Joseph, chip in if you know, but a lot of the places up there in Mud Lake were also, next to some, grazing allotments and things like that. So we originally thought that it may be coming from rabbit brush. The population may build in rabbit brush, but last year we didn't see any population build in rabbit brush. So this year I haven't been monitoring the rabbit brush. Maybe I should go back and monitor a little bit of those rabbit brush populations again this year. But I didn't do that this spring, so maybe that would be a next year thing. But it's supposedly, I think they're overwintering in the alfalfa fields, but I just can't figure out why we only have them in Bingham County and up there in Mud Lake, and that Caribou County and other places aren't getting them. Maybe it's just too cold in the other counties. But even Bannock County doesn't have them. And nobody's really mentioned to me in Burley and Rupert that they've got them either. So it's kind of an enigma.
Yeah, and so we've seen the same thing up here where it's pretty close to those dryland areas right off the desert. But the data that we've seen so far supports that they are there in the alfalfa and that their populations are building the alfalfa. Most people see the damage after, like a significant damage after second cut. They don't really, but I mean, we've seen that the thrips are there and they build up their populations there in the alfalfa.
Yeah, and so Joseph, on this first cut, there was enough thrips to where you could see damage on maybe 10% of the leaves. So it might be quite the year for thrips. Last year wasn't too bad for thrips.
Last year, we didn't have any bad thrips out in Mud Lake. I've always told people, if you want a problem to go away, have somebody from the university come and study it, and it won't show up that year, I promise.
But here's the other thing, though, Joseph, is that my guys didn't spray last year very much. There was only one guy that sprayed once. Everybody else just let it kind of go because of the cost of sprays. But you're up there in Mud Lake, you guys sprayed quite a bit more.
They sprayed quite a bit, but they had other pressures, right? They had weevils and aphids, and they were mostly using Warrior and I think Grizzly, or they're using stuff that's like a pyrethroid base. But Stewart said that maybe that was not effective on thrips. But so I don't know. Well, they did spray quite a bit up here though.
They did, and Stewart, he's talking about the pyrethroid's not working on thrips in onions. Maybe it works better on the alfalfa. I don't know.
So Stewart's not going to do anything for thrip as an insecticide. It's only going to work on the chewing pests and not anything else. So just an FYI for everybody out there. It's a really great product for weevil control, but it's not going to do anything for thrip control.
Did you say Stewart or did you say Warrior?
Stewart.
Okay. Sorry.
It's a very soft chemistry.
Yeah.
So everyone needs to be aware of that.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Got it.
And some of these chemistries cause a flare-up in thrips like they might with other types of insects?
Yes. Pyrethroids, a single active pyrethroid can cause a flare in thrips.
Yeah. That makes sense.
And that's kind of originally what I had told the farmers here in Bingham County. So the year I told them that was the year prior to last year. And so last year they really didn't use those pyrethroids. And, they kind of stayed away from them a little bit.
Great, thanks Reed and Joseph and Jeff. Any other reports on alfalfa with all of this weather we've been having? I'm wondering if the hot streak that we had might have triggered some kind of increase in the thrips. And maybe last year the colder weather was suppressing them. I don't know the biology of thrips, but I'm wondering if the weather is playing a role.
One thing that's been floated out there is that people have been applying for aphids on other things in alfalfa, and they've just knocked out all the populations of beneficials. We don't have the data to show that, but that's a theory that's been floating out there.
Interesting. All right. Do we have any other information from anyone abroad about the forages or any other crops besides cereals and potato? Oh, we do. Do we have any anybody online who can talk about sugar beets?
I can't talk about sugar beets, but I was going to say we've had a lot of trouble with alfalfa weevil in Franklin County. And then also, actually, surprisingly, the black grass bug has been more of a problem in the grain field, in the cereals fields. It really bad year in the range and waste areas, CRP.
We've also had a lot of black grass bug up here.
What?
We've had a lot of black grass bug up here. Big problem.
And then one field with cereal leaf beetle in barley that I know of.
And Bracken, we had a lot of black grass bug here also. A few calls into the office on that.
So anyway.
All right, thanks for that, Bracken.
I know Kaja in
Go ahead.
Idaho, they had a lot of issues with blue aphid moving into the alfalfa in the western Idaho area. You know, down around Hagerman and Grandview and back in there. They've also had quite a bit of issue with Mormon crickets just in general. And they haven't seen grasshoppers yet, but they're afraid of those are going to wander in next. But the blue aphid's a new pest for southern Idaho in the alfalfa. And so that's one I think people need to get a little better handle on for next year. Can be hard to control, but cause significant damage.
Do you know if anyone with the university's been doing some work with that, or
You know, I don't. I've gotten several calls on it, and I don't have any products that work well in the alfalfa. You know, that we have labeled in the alfalfa, but they've done a lot of work with it at the University of Utah or Utah State University. But I don't know if anyone from Idaho State has been involved in any of those discussions over there on that side of the state. You'd have to reach out to the entomologists over there and see.
I'll give after the call today, I'll get a hold of Eric Weniger and see what his thoughts are on this. I'd like to maybe include a little blurb about that in the next Ag Talk report. This is the first I've heard of that particular pest, and it might be the Ag Talk report might be a way for us to get some information out. So interesting. Sugar beets. Can anyone speak to sugar beet? I don't know.
What kind of information are you looking for, Kaja?
We are just interested in a crop update, what kind of issues are occurring right now. I know that with our Spore Trap network, which I'll mention a little bit when we get to the potato updates, there was a, spores of, oh geez, I had it in my list here.
Cercospora.
Yes, they were detected. And I'm just wondering how significant is Cercospora blight in that area? Oh no, sorry, it's the sugar beet powdery mildew spores were detected, but also Cercospora was detected as well. So I've seen both of those. The spores of the powdery mildew were detected, which means in about 2 or 3 weeks we should start seeing symptoms. But with the Cercospora report, what are the implications of that, and how widespread is that, and how big of a problem is that typically in Idaho?
If no one else, I mean, not that I'm involved deeply in it, but in my conversations across the state, Cercospora is a significant problem where they have it, but it tends to be, from what I can gather and talking to crop advisors and retailers across the state, it tends to be more sporadic and spotty. But powdery mildew is becoming a larger and larger problem across the state. In my discussions from Ontario, through the American Falls area with growers, and they're pretty active in fighting it, but it's coming in earlier and staying longer from what I can gather from everybody. So that's my limited knowledge on that. And Cercospora is gaining strength, particularly in spots in the Treasure and Magic Valleys.
Do you know if that's because of development of fungicide resistance in that particular organism? It's not uncommon in the Red River Valley, for example, in North Dakota. Resistance of Cercospora to certain fungicides is very problematic. I'm wondering if we're starting to see some of that here in Idaho.
I don't have a real great answer for that. And so I can't really speak to it per se.
Okay.
I know in the Red River Valley, like strobies, they're not allowed to use strobilurins at all because of the resistance issues. But their geography up there is significantly different than ours, with high humidities and high temperatures versus high temperatures and low humidities. And drying times, I think, are important in that. So possibly in flood irrigated or pivot irrigation, you'll see worse issues than in overhead, like wheel lines or hand lines, overhead type irrigation, where you have drying time in between. So like most diseases, they're very susceptible to humidity and that type of pressure in the field. So.
All right. Well, if there's no one else who can speak to sugar beet on the call, we'll move on to weeds. I want to hear from Pam Hutchinson. I know she's online to see what kind of issues we're facing in potato cropping systems and weed management.
Sure, Kasha, thanks. First of all, I don't know if you saw in the chat, but David Callister said they have identified thrips in Butte County. I don't know if he mentioned it, but he did say in the chat. Anyway, enough for entomology. Okay, so I'm the potato cropping systems weed scientist, University of Idaho, over at the Aberdeen Research and Extension Center, in case you don't know me or what I do. I'll just four things. A little bit of an update on my weed management tour upcoming. A little bit about potato injury and weed control, what's happening because of this rain, and a little bit more about potato injury, and then just an update on volunteer potato control that we talked about 2 weeks ago. So I have a tour. It's 2 weeks from today, and I realize that that's on the same day as our next Ag Talk Tuesday. We didn't know if I was going to have it in person or virtual or both. And I've made the decision to have it in person. So what'll happen, it's on June 30th, and you'll come to the Research and Extension Center, and we'll have you drive around to the different tour stops in your own vehicle. So you'll just tag along with, we'll have a little parade that'll go. We just have one field initially to go to, and we'll walk that whole field, and then the next field, and we'll walk that field as well for the research trials. So it won't be like driving around and around and around, I don't think anyway. And so registration's at 8:30 to 9 a.m. And when you get there, we'll take your temperature with a no-touch forehead thermometer. And if you do not have a mask, we are requiring a mask. If you don't have one, we can give you one. And we'll also have hand sanitizer there. And we'll tell everybody to keep 6 feet apart, unless, within your own group, you've not have not done that because you've already figured out that nobody has COVID. Then you can stay within your group, because that's similar to like if you're with your little family and you can stay together. So, and the reason why your vehicles is we just can't have trailers. There's just no way to stay 6 feet apart on our trailers as we usually do. And so the tour run from 9 to noon. And we will not have a sponsored lunch as we usually do due to the virus. But people can hang around and talk a little bit. But again, they have to remain 6 feet apart. And we're modeling this after there's a weed tour going on up on campus, I think today. And that's what they've decided to do. So it's more stringent than the state rules, but we want to make sure everybody is safe.
So great. And I just wanted to add that actually does not conflict with Ag Talk Tuesday. So that's good. June,
thank you.
yes, June 30th is the third Tuesday of the month. So we
Okay.
only meet on the first, no, sorry, that's the fourth Tuesday. Ag Talk Tuesdays are only on the first and the third Tuesdays. So
Oh,
you
okay.
are spared.
Great. Thank you for pointing that out. So as far as weed control potato crop injury, it's been unusual with this rainfall. As I've mentioned before, we've had the issue last year, but it was a little bit earlier. And so there are places that have received, more than 6 inches here in the last month. We are simulating an excess rainfall trial here at the research station, where we have a set of treatments with regular irrigation schedule, and then a set of treatments with 3 inches extra that we put on with our irrigation, and then a set of treatments that have 6 inches extra. And of course, we can't control the rain, but we hit that all those marks last Friday. And what I've been seeing in the plots is what I've seen out in the field in the past, where I'm seeing we have metribuzin, matrix, prowl, and outlook and eptam. And I've been seeing some injury now with the metribuzin, with the chlorosis in the veins, and that's been in the 3 and the 6 inch simulation. A little bit of leaf modeling from our matrix treatments, and then a little bit of leaf malformation, puckering, and things like that from the outlook. But I have not seen any injury from the prowl. Some people believe that they have seen that out in the field, where there's thickened, thick stems and maybe some brittleness. But in any of those moisture excess rainfall regimes, I have not seen that. So I've had some calls where people have thought that they have seen some prowl damage out in the field. And so I can talk with anybody about that. They can call or text me. Next, with the weed control, excess rain. So what's happening is matrix and metribuzin are the most soluble of any of the potato herbicides we have. So that'd be the most, and in the middle would be outlook and dual, and then the least soluble would be Linux and prowl. So that's why we're seeing some interesting things going on with the matrix metribuzin, because it's moved down, and also because there's so much moisture in the soil. It's really available. It's not adsorbed to soil. It's available out in the soil water solution, so potatoes are able to take it up. And good news though, the weeds are taking it up as well. However, if it's moved below 2 inches, the top 2 inches of soil, that's where most of our weed seed germinates. And so we might see some breaks now in weed control, especially the ones where metribuzin is the control. And I'm especially worried about common lamb's quarters, because matrix, eptam, outlook dual do not really control that well. But metribuzin and prowl do. So at least if you have prowl, that remains at the top because it's not very soluble. And so hopefully if you have that in your system, then you'll get the common lamb's quarter control. So we've also had a frost and a lot of wind over here. And so I think pretty much most people can tell the difference between frost and wind damage, versus potato injury from herbicides. But, because we have the leaf burning and, some other things like that. But that's from the frost, of course. And some of the fields over here in Aberdeen were hit pretty hard, and some weren't, just within a mile or so of each other. So that's been kind of interesting. Lastly, with the volunteer potato control, I talked about that a little bit last week, and we did put it out in the P&W pest alert. But I know it's like way too late for that, to think about that over in Western. Idaho, so I'd be curious about what people have done for volunteer potato control. Oh, it might not be too late, but you know, it is pretty late for them. It's almost timely here on this end of the state. You want to really hit it hard when the little daughter tubers growing underneath your volunteer potato plant are, you know, at tuber initiation, because that way you'll kill the plant and hopefully, you know, kill everything down below too, so that you don't have any more daughter tubers developing, which can end up being volunteer potatoes next year or the year after. And just a reminder, we really don't get down to the kill temperature for tubers in the ground that have been left, you know, from last year, maybe worked into the ground. It has to be 25 degrees Fahrenheit and in the kill zone where the tubers are hanging out in order to kill them so that they don't end up sprouting. So a snow cover, of course, the ground stays relatively warm, and you know, in some places it just doesn't get that cold. Freeze enough, which is unusual. I can't believe that happens out here in the Pacific Northwest, but it does. The update, you know, difference from what I've had out in the past for volunteer potato control is I just inserted some interesting information from a Michigan State University trial where it wasn't for corn, a volunteer potato control in corn, and any of the treatments they had, if they added atrazine, then that improved control significantly. And they had a couple different timings, and the later they put on the treatment, of course, the less control they had, and were in danger of having tubers below that could be volunteer potatoes in the coming years. So with that, anybody, like I said, with volunteer potato control, I'm curious about what has been happening across the state, and then, you know, injury or a loss of weed control because of the rain.
Does anybody have any information to add about volunteer potato issues across the state or other weed issues related to excess rain?
Pam, this is Steve Hines. I'm just curious, here in the Magic Valley, it seems to me like volunteer potatoes have been a serious issue this year. A lot of these fields, you can see the planter rows from last year, and it's kind of hard to tell whether they're growing potatoes or corn. Is there a reason why there's so many volunteer problems this year?
That's interesting, Stephen. Did you guys have a lot of snow cover last year? Because that might have, you know, protected the soil. Huh.
Not really.
And I don't know how cold it got, but it, you know, it just seems like it might not have gotten, you know, below up to that, down to that 25-degree mark, you know,
I kind of wondered if it had to do, remember last September, we got that really cold snap. And I was just wondering if there were a lot of potatoes that didn't get dug because of that.
Oh, you know, you're right. That could be because that happened over here as well, where it froze and some growers had a terrible time trying to get, you know, any of their potatoes out of the field. So yeah, if you're saying that you could see the rows and, you know, from last year, then that's, I would think you're right.
Okay, just curious.
So in Mud Lake, the spuds that we didn't dig up, actually, so the fields that we didn't dig up because we had too much staying frost and it wasn't even worth it, there's less volunteers in those fields than the fields that we did dig up. And I don't know why.
That maybe the, whatever it was where you're at, it froze, and maybe where you know, because those tubers were maybe in the right place to, you know, hit that 25-degree mark. But however we did it, dug them up, or, you know, with tillage afterwards, maybe that put them in a place where it didn't hit that 25-degree. But, you know, please jump in if you have some other thoughts on that.
No, I'm just, yeah, it was actually swapped farms since then, but I went back to look at them and talk to my old farm manager, and yeah, it's wild to see the fields that they didn't dig up. They don't have hardly any volunteers yet, but the fields they were able to harvest did have a whole bunch. And I don't know if it's, it's just kind of mind-blowing, but.
So I'm a little confused though. So the fields that were harvested don't have as many volunteer potatoes as the ones that were harvested? Is that what you're saying? So kind of opposite of what's happening in Magic Valley?
Yeah. So
Okay.
the fields that were able to be harvested have more volunteers, and the fields that they just left have hardly any for now.
Oh. Well, maybe what happened is there just was a lot of, with the harvest equipment, there might have been a lot falling through, for some reason, a lot of smaller tubers, maybe, that made it through the digger and
but you
go
would
ahead.
think when they're close to the surface, they freeze, and then the fields that they didn't dig, there's a lot more of the size there that are able to, become volunteers. I don't know.
Interesting. Yeah, I'll have to think about that. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm wondering if the fields that weren't dug, they might have been excessively wet. Tubers might have been frozen, so there would have been more decay potentially, and just rendered non-viable if they'd experienced excessive moisture, prior to going into the winter. That's one thought.
And then the opposite's happening more western Idaho.
That's just a kind of a thought that maybe that explains some of what we're seeing in the Treasure Valley. I mean, the Magic Valley. But I don't know that we have quantifiable data to really explain what is happening and why they're different, or if they truly are different.
Alrighty, yep, no, it was just a phenomenon I haven't seen, so.
Interesting observation. Any other questions or comments on potato volunteers, weed control issues, anything like that? There will be more information on managing control volunteer potatoes in the current newsletter. You'll also see information in the previous newsletter. This current one has a bit more detail and information in it. So if you're still in an area where controlling volunteer potatoes is an option, you can find that information not only with the Northwest Pest Alert, but also in the most recent Ag Talk report.
And just let me jump in again. If you guys have any pictures of injury, weed control breaks, and I'd love to see those pictures of all the volunteer potatoes there. Sorry that I like seeing pictures like that, but text or email those to you, and I can put my phone number and email here in the chat just in case people don't have it.
That's great. I'm interested too in those types of images. I think the volunteer potatoes in particular, I have a big interest in for the reason of late blight. And when we talk about potato updates, I'll talk a little bit about that. But before we turn to potato, I want to make sure we've covered all of the other crops besides potato in terms of the crop updates. All the weed questions. Anyone have any questions for Pam or anyone else who has given an update or any other comments on those? Okay, I think we'll move on to the potato update then. My particular update will be very short, so I'm hoping that people who are participating on the call can jump in and give a little more information on things that they've seen. I drove down to Aberdeen to see my trials, to take care of my trials and check emergence last week, and we'll be going again tomorrow and Friday of this week. So on the way down, and when we check our spore traps, we get to see how the acreage is progressing in those areas, but it's a very small microscopic view of the big picture. And just driving along, I haven't seen any really serious issues with the potatoes. They seem to be emerging really well in the places in the fields that I've looked at. One thing I am concerned about with respect to volunteer potatoes is the late blight pathogen. It overwinters. It can survive on these volunteer potatoes. The only area where we had late blight reported last year was in the Rupert area. So I very much worry about that area, especially now with the rains that we've been having, and the weather is very conducive. So depending on what your crop stage is at, there are some different strategies and guidelines that you might want to start thinking about. And that information is available in this week's Ag Talk report. In that newsletter, the link for that, like I said, if you scroll up in the chat section, you'll see the link there. But I notice a lot of people are calling in today. So I will follow up this Ag Talk session with the link to the most current Ag Talk report, where you can find some information put together by Phil Wharton on managing late blight. The Spore Trap network that we have in place has been running now. This will be the second full week for most locations, almost all locations except American Falls. This will be the first week for American Falls. Anyway, last week from this period of time, June 1st to June 8th, there were no spore detections for the late blight pathogen in the spore trapping network. This week, we'll have results from that spore trap network either tomorrow or Thursday. And as soon as those results are available, I can send those out to those who are on that email list. If you're interested in getting the spore trap network report that James Woodall compiles every week, be sure to let me know, and I can get your information so that he can add it to the emailing list. There is also a website where you can find this information, and I am putting that here in the chat. It's cropalerts.org. That also, oops, I just sent that to Pam. Cropalerts.org is where you can find the weekly update for the spore trap network. And that is information that's compiled by James Woodall. His team essentially, we send them the tubes. Several people from around the state will send his lab the tubes. They'll extract the nucleic acids and perform molecular tests to look for various pathogens on potato and sugar beet. And soon we'll be also providing that same similar information for cereals. Juliet, do you know when we will start reporting the cereal pathogens?
Yeah, as soon as we get the funding to get the testing.
Okay. That's always a bottleneck. So the hope is that we can expand this network for cereals as well. I was hoping we could get that out this year, but I guess I was mistaken. We just got to keep trying. So the other thing.
Well, sorry, Kasha, let me jump in real quick. I forgot to add that, as you know, Don Morishita, our weed scientist at the Kimberly Research and Extension Center, retired a little over a year ago. And we're happy that our new weed scientist will be on board July 6th. And his name is Albert Adjesawar. And so hopefully you can stop by Kimberly and welcome him. And we're excited about this. And then next year we'll be able to have our back-to-back Kimberly and Aberdeen weed management tours.
I'm so glad that you're able to have a physical tour, field tour this year. And if you want additional topics for the tour, I'm happy to talk about what we're doing with our trials there at Aberdeen.
Please, yes, please. And I'll ask you to Juliet and then a couple other people on station there. Thank you.
So thanks for that. And also, I guess that's all I really have for the potato update from my perspective. So I'm hoping that there are some people on the call who can fill in some more information on the crop stage, how it's emerging, any issues that are being seen, any observations at all. Anyone have any comments on potatoes? I was up in Ashton last week, and plants were emerging really nicely there as well. I was kind of surprised at how far along they were. So didn't appear to have any delays in planting. It seemed, generally speaking, to be a very favorable environment for putting potatoes in the ground in that area. We are monitoring aphids. We started last week, and we did actually find a few in Ashton area, some in the Teutonia area, and we also found some aphids throughout the eastern part of the state. So they are definitely up and around and moving. And so starting this week, I should be providing that information as well. So if you're interested in the aphid report, how many aphids are in flight that we're capturing, you can contact me at my, I'll just give everybody my email address, and you can, and I'll email this out as well. And I'll add your list to the aphid network list and provide you a weekly update on aphid numbers and aphid monitoring. So any other comments on potatoes and acreage and what's happening in potato? Don't be shy. If you have any kind of information you want to share, this is a good time to do it. Okay, well, with that, I think we're going to move on to our featured topics. I would like to introduce Juliet Marshall. I introduced her at the very beginning before I was recording. She is our cereals agronomist and plant pathologist, and she will be giving you some information on fungicides, final fungicide recommendations for small grains. So Juliet, are you ready to share your screen?
Yeah, I'm ready to share the screen.
I guess I need to make you a co-host. I thought you were automatically a co-host.
I thought so.
Well, you are now for sure.
Okay. All right, so I hope that I will not make this too long. And what I'd like to do is just try to go over how, even though we're late in the season, how we can work with trying to get some of these late season diseases under control. And so obviously our late season diseases at this point are going to be kind of restricted to some of the foliar pathogens and the head blight pathogens. So I do want to point out we have our website, our extension website, uidaho.edu, extension cereals, South Central, Southeast Idaho. And we have a lot of information available there. We also have our plant diagnostics website on this slide. And if you have questions on plant diagnostics, no matter what the crop is, we have a website that you can go to look at where we can submit the samples. And Kasia already mentioned our cropalerts.org website, which we're utilizing to post a lot of the spore trapping data and other information like stripe rust alerts. Okay. I want to emphasize Greenbridge again because we keep seeing the same issues and the issues associated with lack of a good crop rotation. It's really, really important, not only for soil-borne diseases, but with some of our foliar diseases as well. And of course, the Greenbridge is when you have multiple cropping cycles within the same year. We have that problem with small grains when we have the winter overlapping the spring crop, which gives us a Greenbridge within season. But we also have constant availability of green material of cereals when we have volunteers. And so we have a lot of potential problems associated with Greenbridge, which does include stripe rust, and it does include Pythium and some of the other soil-borne diseases, as well as cereal cyst nematode. I want to emphasize over and over again how important to keep that long rotation between the different types of crops. I know it's hard to do for some people, but we want to have this long rotation and not just focus on potatoes, wheat, potatoes, wheat cereals, barley, whatever it is. So that the focus on a lot of our rotation seems to be in trying to keep potatoes in every third year, when we really need to also consider that rotation is so important for managing the pest life cycles of cereals as well. And remember that the greater the crop diversity associated with our crop rotations, the lower the overall pest pressure is going to be, no matter what the crop is. We talk about rotating crops, but we also need to talk about rotating varieties within each crop and rotating fungicides and herbicides as well to try to reduce herbicide and fungicide resistance. So focusing on small grains itself and late season diseases, one of the two things I want to focus on are stripe rust and fusarium head blight. Obviously, stripe rust over here on the right side of the screen is prevalent in some of our most susceptible varieties. And here we have Brundage, soft white winter, and the stripe rust is very, very prevalent wherever Brundage is grown. When the stripe rust is, spores are present. With stripe rust, we definitely will have yield reduction, quality reduction, especially test weight, not so much any toxins. The problem with fusarium head blight is the yield reduction, the quality reduction, as well as our toxins that accumulate on the outside of the grain. So there's multiple reasons to focus on fusarium head blight, and that toxin is a big, big issue. And what we're looking for is right now in our winter wheat, we should start to be seeing fusarium head blight. We are seeing these signs and symptoms in the areas around Kimberly where we have our fusarium head blight nursery and where we've inoculated pretty heavily. And what you're looking for are blank heads, discoloration of the heads, also for active signs of the fungus, which is an orange production of Sporodokia. And this slide here, you can see a slightly orange color associated with some of the edges of the chaff, and also looking for a brown-black discoloration along the rachis, which is at the stem going up and down the head. So these are the signs that we're looking for. Obviously, what we want to do with our varieties that are heading right now is to prevent infection to start with. When we get a good infection, you'll see this dark brown black coloration on the chaff and the orange Sporodokia along the sides of the chaff and up the awns even. These salmon orange colored spores are most frequently seen where you have the chaff along, where you have the spikelet joining the rachis right there along the juncture. There's where you most frequently will see the salmon orange colored spores. We see these black structures, sexual stage parathecia, very rarely. So this is an example of the reduction in test weight. The seed is killed prematurely. You can get the fungi growing right on the outside of the killed seedlings or seed developing, and they're pink and they're chalky. And so if you take these tombstone kernels and put them in your hand, you can actually see the fungi spores on their surface, a white chalky in your hand. So obviously you can see the severe reduction in test weight associated with the infection, and this is some of the things that you really want to prevent. A little bit harder to see in barley. You can see a spikelet here, a spikelet there, often affected, but rarely do you see a whole head infected. So you'll have very hard to tell in the field these infected little areas in barley. Sometimes under conditions where you have wet weather, like today, you may see additional development of the infection all the way through the head, and you can see where it spreads in the head. This is more rare in barley, but very frequent in wheat. So sometimes barley just looks like dirty wheat. I mean, sometimes barley infections just look like dirty barley, and It's not as obvious in barley as it is in wheat. One way to check is to do a collection of some of the infected heads and put it in a Ziploc bag. And then you can take a look and see whether or not you have the fungi growing. And this is a quick and dirty diagnostic test. If it turns pink and a lot of white, then you can see for sure that it's likely fusarium fungi growing in the head. Obviously, we want to prevent from getting that far in advance. So what we want to do is talk about the tools that we have available with fungicides that will actually prevent the DON toxins accumulating in the grain, which results in rejection, high rejection. One of the things I like to emphasize is that if you're interested in looking for varieties that are resistant and need less fungicide application to prevent infection, we have those varieties listed on our website and in our small grains report. Some of the varieties are going to be a lot more susceptible than others. Varieties like UI Stone, UI Pettit, they're going to be more susceptible to fusarium head blight. When we talk about the resistant varieties in the hard red spring, we're looking at varieties like the HRS 3419, which we use as a check, but LCS iron is also a little bit more resistant than some of the others. But we can still get fusarium head blight in all of these varieties if we have a high environmental conditions that favor the infection. We have on our hard white, Dane showing the least susceptibility, but if Trenton Stanger's still online, he actually sent me samples from Dane hard white spring wheat in a field from the Magic Valley area a couple years ago where we saw a high level of infection even in Dane. So it just depends on the environment. Barley varieties also have a wide variety of susceptibility. We do have the varieties listed with the most susceptible to the least susceptible. And it all depends on the environment. This was in a heavily inoculated area in our screening nursery. So the question really does come in when we have susceptible varieties and we're looking to control the infection late season in the actual fields. And so one of the things I want to really emphasize, fungicide application at this late stage to control fusarium head blight should also significantly control stripe rust. And so what we're looking at really is any fungicides that we use that are effective against head blight will also give late season foliar protection against a lot of other diseases. Excuse me a second. So timing of application is very important. This gives a visual for timing of application of fungicides for wheat and for barley. For wheat, we want to look at about 50% flowering and later. This is too early. If we don't see any of the anthers being extruded, they're not quite ready and not quite in flowering. This is just right. So if we can get the majority of heads at flowering to a little bit later, that would be the right time to spray wheat for control of fusarium head blight as well as stripe rust. Barley's a little bit more difficult because we can't always predict when we're going to have flowering. We really want to get when the majority of heads are emerged and where they are visible so that they also get good coverage from the fungicide application. This is a cartoon that shows you the same type of information. What you're looking at for wheat especially is the day where you have flowering and beyond is when we're looking to spray for stripe rust and for fusarium head blight, especially fusarium head blight. We talk about optimal application and we really want to get the best coverage. And frankly, the best coverage is going to come from ground rigs. You want to be able to spray all sides of the head. Closer to horizontal is better. We want higher water volumes, 18 to 20 gallons per acre. And if you can, forward and backward nozzles are really important to get the best coverage. Please make sure that the applicators are clean, whether you're talking about the booms or the tanks. And right now we have no forecasting systems that are really good for irrigated production, but we do have really good conditions now with rain at flowering, but we have cooler conditions right now. So the cooler conditions are not going to be really conducive for infection until we get into the warmer areas that are predicted later in the week. This is just a visual to show you the best coverage. We get the best coverage with ground rigs with backward and forward nozzles. Less coverage is obtained with airplanes applicating at low volume. So the fungicides that are available, we have Prosaro, Carumba, Proline, and Folicure, Tilt, and Miravis Ace. The most effective coverage is going to come from the triazole sprayed right at flowering to a little bit later. What I want to emphasize is Miravis Ace just does as good of a job as Carumba and Prosaro right now with the effectiveness of coverage for protection against Fusarium head blight. I do want to make sure that people realize that strobilurin fungicides have been shown to increase Fusarium and DON, not the disease, but the content of DON in the grain. They're not recommended for Fusarium head blight management. Even as late as full flag leaf emergence, we don't recommend using strobilurin fungicides after flag leaf emergence. We really try to reduce the accumulation of DON toxins in the grain. So the fungicides that can be used are widespread. This is a chart that's going to show the fungicides that can be used up to flowering. And I have a list. These fungicides that I have listed were provided by Zongmin Chan in a detailed email about which fungicides are available for controlling. And of course, his focus is for stripe rust. Just because these fungicides are available to be used up to flowering doesn't mean that they should be used if they have strobilurin fungicides contained in them. So some of these are mixed with different strobilurin fungicides. These are fungicides that can be used up to flowering completed, where you even have kernel watery ripe at Feeks growth 10.5.1. And again, most of these fungicides do not have strobilurin fungicides in them. Some of them have different application dates according to 45 days before harvest or 40 days before harvest. And of course, you really need to be careful again that you are paying attention to the pre-harvest interval, whether it's 30 to 45 days before harvest. The one thing I also want to mention is looking at the residue associated with fungicide application. Fungicide residue really reduces rather quickly after application. And so if you are putting fungicides on the wheat spikes right before all of the heads are emerged, you're going to have a lot less ability to reduce head blight infection. So taking a look at this chart on the right, our residue decreases by 50% within 7 days after application. And so that really reduces the effectiveness. And so it's very important to target the maximum flowering and maximum head emergence in order to get the best result associated with Fusarium head blight application. Are there any questions associated with the application of fungicides? I don't hear any questions.
I have a question. With the strobilurins, I've always called them strobilurins. Strobes. Why do you suppose that fungicide increases this mycotoxin or leads to an increase in the mycotoxin?
There's a lot of speculation as to why that is happening. Have I lost my visual again?
Nope, we still see you. Oh wait, we just see you, but not the shared screen. Did you stop sharing?
I stopped sharing, yes,
Oh, okay. Yeah, we can still see you.
but it's kind of confusing.
Oh, it's frozen. It is frozen. You are frozen. We can still hear you there, though.
All right, as long as you can hear me. There's several speculations as to why the strobilurins are causing an increase down production. We do find that the strobilurins are decreasing disease quite a bit, but the fungi are still trying to infect and still producing DON toxins. So while you're reducing the impact of the fungi and you're reducing the impact of the disease, the fungi are still trying to infect, and under those conditions, you don't eliminate the fungi from the environment, and the fungi are still putting spores out and still infecting later in the season. So a good example is to look at that last slide where we had the decrease in the residue of the fungicide. So we've reduced the fungi, and then later as that fungicide reduces the infectivity, you still have reduced disease, but the fungicide is no longer there late season to protect the heads, but the fungi are still in the environment and still trying to infect. So they're still producing DON toxins. And for some reason, the strobilurins aren't as good as the triazoles. I think the triazoles are more effective in actually reducing the efficacy of the fungicide, of the fungi. Does that make any sense?
I think so.
There's not a lot of good explanations other than that there's, even after the fungicides have been effective in reducing the initial infections, the fungi are still active and still trying to affect later when the fungicide is not as effective. So you still have fungi producing DON toxins, still trying to infect.
Thank you for that explanation. I've always been curious about that. Does anyone else have a question for Juliet or a comment regarding these fungicide uses this time of year? We do have in this week's newsletter, you will see some more information on stripe rust that Juliet put together. And I believe you included with your article a table that outlines some fungicides for small grains.
Yeah, I think I did, and I will provide this information on our website and the cropalerts.org as well.
Excellent, thank you. So with that, I think we want to move on to our next featured speaker. Joseph Sagers is going to talk about Teff grass as an emergency crop. And Joseph is with the University of Idaho, based out of Jefferson and what other county? You had two counties.
Clark County.
Jefferson and Clark counties. And so I hope that sharing the screen will work and we won't have any technical issues. Are you ready to go, Joseph?
Yes, I think so. Can you all see my screen okay?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. So yeah, like you said, my name is Joseph Sagers. I don't think we need to go much more into that. So I'll try to keep this fairly brief and simple. It's kind of hard to follow Juliet and her wealth of knowledge, but And they originally talked about, well, what could you share that was pertinent to cereal crops? And I'm like, I can't follow Juliet with really anything of value. She would cover way more than I could. But this is just a little project that I have been working on, and this is Teff is actually the reason why I actually ended up getting into extension. I was just some punk snot-nosed kid off of a beef operation in Utah, going to school, and my family was looking for an alternative crop between our alfalfa crops. And I heard about Teff. I started getting interested in it, and I went and talked to a professor. He ended up giving me a job. He was the extension agronomist, Earl Creech, down there at Utah State. And lo and behold, I'm here in extension. So anyway, like we talked about, making hay, right? Most beef operations, they just want to put up enough feed to get through the winter. They're looking to feed pregnant lactating cows, and so they want some kind of high protein source. Well, alfalfa is like really the best option. There's nothing that can be cut as often as alfalfa and yield it. But the biggest question is, what do these small potato beef operations do between alfalfa crops? Most of them aren't interested in buying like a combine or getting an extra seed drill. They just want to use all the same equipment they already have. So they want something they can plant like alfalfa, just prep the seedbed the same amount as alfalfa, use their swath that they already got. And I think, from what I've learned, Teff is really a great option for that. So Teff, it's a C4 grass, so it means it really, really loves heat. It comes from Ethiopia, and it's a really high protein grain crop. And it's gluten-free, so that's a good selling point. But I'll be completely honest with you. First of all, it's used to make this bread, which is called injera bread. I'll be honest, it tastes like absolute garbage, at least in my opinion. Okay, there's a lot of people out there. I'm sure the injera snobs of this conversation will probably be mad at me. And I don't think that Idaho needs another grain crop. Correct me if I'm wrong, Juliet, but I think we're good. But as far as hay goes, they used it to feed their cows, and they used to use their straw after they'd already harvested the grain, and then they realized, hey, if we just harvest it before it goes to seed, we get a really high quality forage. So, and it's fairly drought tolerant. So anyway, you guys all know how warm temperature plants work, right? So this is one of them, right? So instead of following the blue line like most cool season grasses, it follows the red line like a warm season crop. Okay, and it just once the heat takes off, it just explodes. It hates frost. If you just whisper the word frost to it, it'll wilt and die. And so something worth noting. And then seedbed prep, just like you would alfalfa. I always say the rule of boot. If you can step on the dirt and see where the heel of your boot touches the ground, then it's probably still too soft. I like to be able to bounce a basketball off of the ground when we do it. So anyway, we decided to put some in the ground down in Kimberly last year and this year. And these are the planting dates. Last year we did May 13th, June 3rd, and June 14th. This year we've done May 14th, June 1st, and yesterday. We planted at 2 different planting rates, 2.5 pounds the acre and 5 pounds the acre. Now I know you guys are thinking that 2.5 pounds the acre doesn't sound like very much, but the seed is really small. I mean, it's like planting sand into the ground. There's more than 2 million seeds per pound with Teff, so it's really small seeds. So 2.5 pounds to the acre really isn't that absurd, even though it looks like it is. Most people recommend 4 to 8 pounds per acre, and so we just wanted to see what a lighter weight would do. And then we did 3 different cutting heights off our first crop. We did 4 inches, 6 inches, and 9 inches. So anyway, this is a picture I really love to show. So this is Reed Finley driving our tractor on our second planting date. It was around the 1st of June. And then over here in the background, you can see Steve Hines and Carmen Wilmore. They're working on their project that Carmen worked on. And that was a great project, various cutting rates and cutting timing. And, so anyway, there's 4 cuts, 3 cuts, 2 cuts, and 1 cut. Anyway, out here, they were taking their first cutting on the day that we were doing our second planting, which I thought was funny. And it was Steve Hines, actually. I can't remember if it was this day or a previous day, but he went out there and he said it was 2 weeks after we had planted, and he was like, "Did you guys even plant anything out there?" And I was like, "Yeah, we did." And we walked out to the field. It was like, "Oh, look, there it is, right there. You can see it." This was 2 weeks after planting. If you zoom in, it's like it's a really small plant initially. It'll come up and it'll just have a little tiny cotyledon poke out, and then it'll shoot out a really, really deep root initially. It puts all its energy into making a root, and it'll just sit at that size until it gets some heat to it, usually above 70 degrees or so. And so it'll just sit there and just grow like that. And this is about, I think, 3 or 4 weeks. I'd have to look at the date, but I think this is 4 weeks after that first picture. So about 6 weeks of growth. And then, you know, this is what it looked like at the time of harvest. So it's just one of those things where it takes a little bit of time initially, but once it gets some heat, it just grows really, really fast. And it doesn't look like it's super tall, but it's really dense down in the canopy. So anyway, fertilization, it does pretty good on marginal soils. It's similar to any other grass crop. You know, you're going to have a lot of nitrogen that got to put into it. And following alfalfa, which is one of the reasons why I originally started studying this, you know, is, you know, alfalfa provides a pretty good boost, and you know, you would see pretty good yields following an alfalfa crop. So like I said, there's 2.2 million seeds per pound, and you really want to put it really shallow in the soil. You know, 1/4 of an inch is pretty deep, 1/8 of an inch is just about right. There's a bunch of varieties out there available. So anyway, if you look, so this is the day that we harvested. This was the one we planted in mid-May, and this was the 1st of June, and this was mid-June. So you can see that there's, you know, quite a bit of variability in just the yield. And today I'm not even going to talk about quality, but there's also variability in the quality. Once it starts to go to seed, the quality drops pretty dramatically. And another big problem we have is weed pressure, because it does stay small for so long and then just kind of explodes in growth. Weeds can be a huge, significant problem. So if you don't control weeds in Teff, then they will get away from you, and you'll have a huge dramatic drop in yield, especially if you have any grass weeds. You know, your witch's broom, foxtail, anything like that can be really detrimental and kind of overcrowd. But once you control the weeds when they're small, usually Teff will outcompete. It just needs to get some growth on it. So, you know, you can use 2,4-D on it. It is labeled in Idaho for 2,4-D. The problem is we didn't have that as an option. And so, well, we had it as an option, but I couldn't guarantee that it has zero effect on its growth. And so we opted to do something like this. This was Reed Finley yesterday. We were out on our hands and knees, just pulling out every single weed out of our plots. And then, so that's one option. Glyphosate, what you can do, because it is planted so late in the year, what you can do is you could, you know, easily water your field, get all the weeds to germinate, spray it with glyphosate, and then plant into it, or something along those lines. But weed control is important. Water requirements, like I said, it can do really well with drought. But light, frequent irrigations while it's getting established, because the seeds are so small, it can get washed out really, really easy. And then, you know, 6 to 12 inches per cutting, you can usually expect to get about 2 cuttings off of it a year. That's what we did. And so, you know, you're looking at about 24 inches over the course of the year, about. And, you know, of course, like all plants, it does enjoy water, but it can handle some drought. Lodging can be a really big problem because it is such a fine-stemmed plant. You know, it can just, you just have to put your header a little bit lower, and, you know, yields can decrease if it's lodged. And this is what we came up with. But what I'd actually like to look at is this here, we ran some statistics, and the conclusion we came up with is, there is a difference in your planting dates, but there was no statistical difference between our early cutting, which was mid-May, or our early planting in mid-May, and our 1st of June planting. Okay, so overall, yes, there was a difference, but there was no overall statistical difference between those two yields, and then the late planting did give us a pretty big decrease. As far as planting rate, there was no statistical difference between our low and high rate, the 2.5 pounds and 5 pounds to the acre in planting. Then our cutting height. The interesting thing was there was statistical difference off of the cutting height, but notice how on the first year, or on the first cut, if you cut low, you would get a higher yield, of course, right? And that would affect the cutting on the second year. But if you look at the total harvest at the end, there was no statistical difference. So basically the crop just compensated for whatever you did. So you just have to look at it and say, I would like to take my cutting early, or I'd like to take my cutting later. So, or my higher yield early, or my higher yield later. So now I know this makes the crop look like it's really, really high, but really the man standing in this photo is just, about maybe 4 foot even. So it's not really a super high crop, but it is a really, really dense yielding crop. And so even though you'll look at fields next to it that, like triticale can be like really, really tall, but it's just not as dense. Let's see here. So, okay, so some things that you can use Teff for, right? So it is an annual crop. And I'm not saying this is going to replace, say, pasture grass or anything like that. It's not going to cure any significant problems we have, but it's another tool in the toolbox that growers can use in Idaho. So a rotation between alfalfa crops. My family loved it because we use it as a rotation. We just wanted to get through 2 years and then go back into alfalfa. And it's it has a high yield, high quality grass hay you can put down, right? So you can use it between alfalfa crops. A lot of people who decide, well, I just want to thicken up that stand for 1 more year to get 1 more yield out of it. After they take off first crop, it's still not too late to just put it into Teff grass, or plant Teff grass into it. So the allelopathic properties of alfalfa won't hurt Teff. And so you can just get 1 more, you can thicken up alfalfa stand for 1 more year before you take it out. Using it in an annual grazing mix, which a lot of people are liking to use things like winter wheat or forage oats or triticale planted in the spring, and then graze those as a green crop or as a cover crop, some of them consider it. And if you could include that in there as part of the summer slump, once again, it's kind of hard because those are planted early and Teff is planted later. So as an emergency crop, right? So if you put in something, whatever it be, and it fails miserably, and you can either try to replant that and be 4 weeks behind, or you can put in Teff and you're not out anything, because Teff can easily be planted 1st of June and not show significant difference in yield. As a double crop, right? So a lot of people take off one of their other crops, one of their grain crops or something like that. You could easily plant Teff in and still get 1 yield off of it, probably not 2. But it could be double cropped. Now there's some damage, or there's some issues with that, like Juliet already pointed out. If you do something like that, you could end up creating a green ridge. Now, we don't think that Teff has any of the same pests that your cereal crops do, but they also didn't think that there'd be any pests for all of the grain peas that people have been planting. And then, what was it, 3 or 5 years after they started putting grain peas, they found, oh yeah, there are some some pests that do come with that. So anyway, so like I said, there's pros and cons to everything. Pros, it's a high yield, high quality, lower input crop. It needs less water, and forage growers can already use the the tools they're already using. And like I said, no major pests as of yet. So it's great for that. It does have a lot of cons though. You have to control the weeds early on. It has such a small seed. I talked to one guy who grows teff, and he said, what the best thing to do is you open up your leg, or the openers on your legume box. You need to just close those as much as you possibly can. And there'll still be a little bit that just spills out everywhere. And that's just about the right seeding rate of what you need to put it down at. So the seed can be an issue. Lodging can be an issue. And then, like I said, because it has been selected for thousands of years as a grain crop, once it starts to head out, then the quality decreases dramatically as it puts its quality up into its seed head. And it is an annual crop, which most forage growers like something that they can plant once and harvest for years. But I think that perspective is starting to change quite a bit with the emergence of more annual forages. So take-home points here. Planting earlier may not give you an advantage, but planting too late can reduce the yield on that first cut. Seeding rate and cutting cut are not as important as planting date, and cutting low on the first crop can hinder teff ability to regrow on the second crop. So with that, I know you've seen a lot of pictures of Reed Finley, but is there any other comments or questions you guys have? Reed, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that was great, Joseph. Except for the height deal, I'm going to kill you for that. I told Juliet we need to get you for that.
I did not include any pictures of Juliet for height reference.
I have a quick question about the teff. Okay,
Yeah.
so how easy is it to harvest, and is there a market for the actual teff grain here? And if there's not, then that's why you're suggesting to use it as a forage crop?
Yes, I'm recommending using it as a forage crop. I have no experience using it as a grain crop. So harvesting it as a forage crop is really simple because you can just use a swather that you already have. Now as a grain crop, I don't know. I mean, I would assume that it runs fairly similar through your combine. You'd have to buy the special screens and everything, but to me, I don't feel like it would be too dramatically difficult to have a grain combine that could use it, or that could pick it up and harvest it just fine. Obviously, you'd have a lot that probably go through back into the combine too, and you could probably have a little bit of, but you wouldn't have any volunteer because it would all die off over the winter. So I don't know where you could put it. Like you would have to have like a special contract with somebody where you're going to say, this is where I'm going to get my grain.
We got some extra planted at the end there, Joseph, and we could, try running one of the combines through it and see what we get. See how hard it is to combine out.
I guess we could. We'd have to find some really small screens, but we could, just for kicks and giggles, and just anecdotally know what to do with it. Yeah.
But it is super small. You'd have to turn the fan down way low and get some pretty tight screens.
Yeah, because even when the seed's coated, it's still really small.
So Joseph, you said that you didn't use 2,4-D because you were afraid it might hurt the teff in your trial.
Yeah.
Have you sprayed any teff with 2,4-D? Seen any damage from that at all?
Yeah, I've sprayed teff on 2,4-D on some research plots and a lot of plots that were, or not plots, but fields that weren't research. My family grows teff between their alfalfa. It works just fine. I mean, it grows just fine after it's been sprayed with 2,4-D. And, if it were my own personal field, I'd say there's no problem spraying it. But, on a lot of these warm season grasses like your sorghum, sudan, corn, those kinds of things, you can see 2,4-D damage even though the crop's still there. It's still harvestable and you still get a good yield off of it. But where I'm dealing with super tiny plants, and like I'm just standing, Reed and I were out there standing in our field yesterday, and we're like, look, there's a lot of weeds that need to be taken care of. I'm like, we can't guarantee that this has zero damage on the crop. And I'm like, I'm not going to find that out in this year when I'm going up for P&P. So let's try that with a different trial. And we just pull them out by hand.
So last year we did spray, but the Teff was a little bit larger. And then
sprayed it, I
also
think,
we had
after
wheat
first crop.
fields. We had wheat fields on both sides. This year we got a potato field and it was just a little bit on the downwind side of it. So we decided instead of taking a risk for somebody else's potatoes, we just weed.
Yeah. We didn't want to kill the potato crop next to us while they were doing research. That could have ended badly for us. But yeah.
Joseph,
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What is is there any nitrate feeding issues with that forage that you have to be careful with? And how much nitrogen do you recommend on that
So
to raise that crop?
Yeah, so I usually recommend, like, for maximum yields where you don't want to see nitrates, I'd say about 80 to 100 pounds, and I know 100 is a little on the high side if you're watching it. Teff has always been bragged about as not being a nitrate accumulator, meaning it does not accumulate nitrates very readily. However, up at the Nancy Cummings Research Center, I forget his name. There was a professor up there who he's housed in Moscow, but he was doing research on the Nancy Cummings Research Center. They had problems with nitrates in their Teff, along with some Sudan grass and other stuff too. So everything had nitrates, but so did their Teff. So it's like it can have nitrates, and I would say, yeah, you got to be careful with that with any grass. But it's one of the it's known to be one of the ones that accumulates less nitrates than others.
So you said 80 pounds of nitrogen you recommend?
Yeah, that's an easy one. On this trial, we put down 100 pounds of nitrogen just because I want to make sure that nitrogen isn't a limiting factor, but 80 pounds is usually a better answer.
So do you have any quality reports on this as a forage crop then?
So not off of this one. So we ran our quality, and then I realized my equation was wrong. So I don't want to show you a whole bunch of wrong data. But I do know that the protein dropped off dramatically on our second crop, and that was mostly because we let it go too far. It was just a couple of extension educators who were trying to pretend like they were researchers. And anyway, it was one of those things where we harvested it maybe a week or two late, and it was headed out. And so our quality was down pretty low on the second crop. The protein was, and the ADF and NDF had gone up, that kind of stuff. So we'll see what happens this year, and we're going to do that data with the correct equations, and hopefully we'll have something that we can share with people. But normally from Teff, you can easily see, 12 to 15% protein, which is, pretty good for a grass, I feel like. Of course, it's not alfalfa, but it's good protein.
Another couple of questions. As far as drying time, putting up the hay, up that grass, is it relatively, the same as alfalfa, a little quicker maybe to put up? And also, what's the palatability to feed for cows? Do they eat it well?
It's really palatable if it has not gone to seed. It's just like a really long, leafy, highly palatable grass. The dryability, it dries out pretty quick. I would say it's a little quicker than alfalfa. It does accumulate moisture in its stems, and so if you have a crimper or something like that, it definitely helps it out. But I would say it's not. It dries out quicker than your alfalfa would, and so you can get pretty good yields off of it. But it's just one of those things where you need to make sure that you have the equipment, because sometimes I've seen some people say, well, it's a grass hay, you don't need to run it through a crimper, but then they end up waiting forever because their stems were still sitting at like 20% moisture, So a crimper definitely still does help.
On the herbicide, really quick, is it it's considered a haylage, right? So any herbicide that has the I want to say it's not permanent pasture, but rangeland cut for haylage. Do you know if that is good enough on the label to be able to use? And is that how you've read that label 2,4-D? Does it say Teff specifically?
I'm thinking of one that says Teff specifically. Are you reading the label right now?
No, I was just when I read the label, that's some of the things you have to look for.
Right.
If it says a grass crop, then it has to, I think, say haylage
Yeah.
or cut for hay,
Yeah.
Um,
and then it's on label to use.
Yeah.
Yep. This is Pam. Yes, technically it would be labeled, but there are some labels that are specific to Teff. But yeah, if it's a grass crop, so
yeah.
You are correct in looking at that and interpreting that correctly. And let me jump in here. I knew that Joel Felix, Oregon State University over at Malheur Experiment Station, a while ago, he'd done some Teff work. And I just looked that up real quick, and all he looked at for grasses was barnyard grass, but he got control with PowerFlex, which is pyroxylum, and then Gold Sky, which is like a three-way can them and confuse them type of mix, but it has the pyroxylum in there. And he had no really crop injury, but he did get control of the barnyard grass.
And do both of those have on the label? Do they have grass hay on the label as a crop?
I don't know that. I would have to look that up real quick.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I'm always hesitant because for the longest time nobody would put Teff on their label because they just didn't want to. Well, first of all, it's just a minor crop here in the United States. Like it wasn't worth the millions of dollars it takes to put on the label. In Idaho, recently they said something along the lines of if it was good enough for one crop, then it could be used for Teff as well, and then they just slapped it on there and didn't cost them a whole lot of money to put it on. We'd have to talk to some other guys at the ISDA who are actually involved with that, but anyway, it is on a few labels now. But yeah, that's good to know. If there are a few things labeled for grass hay as well, but it's kind of hard to find herbicides for Teff. So, yeah. Okay, well, any other questions? Or I think everybody's experts on Teff now.
That was a great job, Joseph. I've really learned a lot. Thank you.
Okay, I'm glad.
I am finishing the presentations up because we had our power go off again. And Kosh is offline, but I'm back on. Let's see. I was going to see if there's anything else that we needed to talk about. I can't think of anything other than the session is being recorded and will be available for 2 weeks online, just to reiterate. A link, it will be sent to anybody who has registered. So we will try to get a Ag Talk Tuesday session bulletin ready for everybody. And then one final thing, we will have Ag Talk Tuesday next 2 weeks. Let me see, that would actually be July 7th is our next Ag Talk Tuesday. So that's 2 days, 2 Tuesdays, the first and the third Tuesday of every month. And so sometimes we'll kind of go like 3 weeks in between Ag Talk Tuesday. So about that time, July 7th should be getting towards the end of our small grains, but smack dab in the middle of most other crops. If there's any comments or any questions, please give us a call and contact any one of us, and we'll be happy to either entertain your questions or give us ideas of what you'd like to see on an Ag Talk Tuesday. So, Joseph, could you stop sharing your screen?
Sorry, yeah.
Oh, no problem there. I just want to check to see if there's any additional questions on the chat box or if anybody else has any additional comments. Anybody? If not, thanks so much for attending. I'm learning a lot and I'm really enjoying these Ag Talk Tuesdays. So please feel free to pass it on to other people. And we always appreciate anybody's ability to comment on their perspectives on their crop or their experience this year of what's going on in their area.
Juliet,
Any,
this is Pam. Juliet, this is
yeah.
Pam real quick. I can't remember which date it is, but our Dean of College and Ag and Life Sciences, Dean Perella, will be joining us and maybe have that right in front of us. So we hope everyone can chime in for that one. I'm sure he'd be really excited to hear and see all of you on the call.
He's given an update on the College of Ag and Life Sciences, and that will be on the 21st, I believe, of July. Go ahead and check the website for the upcoming schedule.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Bye for now.
Thanks. See you.